we got into very briefly, as she threw in her opinion too, on what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, and some really extraordinary things. If you cast your mind back to just over a month ago, I think everyone in the world was shocked and horrified. And it's amazing how quickly things change. It's amazing how quickly people move on. Because now we're talking very theoretically and in abstract ways about stuff that is actually happening on the ground and that has been happening now for a whole month in southern Israel, even in northern Israel, on the Dome, which is constantly under fire, and then in Gaza, which is now turning into the focus of the world. We have in the studio, while he's still in South Africa, I'm pleased to say, the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa. And it's a great pleasure, Ambassador, to have you here. He is, of course, Eliav Belotsercovsky, who is very much trying to update the people in South Africa about what's going on in Israel and what Israel needs to know about what's going on here. So, first of all, are you planning to make an evacuation or an exit anytime soon? Are your bags packed, Ambassador?
So I arrived to South Africa 2 years ago, and my main mission is to try to improve the relations between Israel and South Africa. And I still am deeply committed to this mission, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, your work's cut out for you because the government have made it absolutely clear that they are disinterested in any kinds of relationships, good or bad, with Israel. They just want nothing to do with Israel. Just this week, the latest news is that South Africa is pulling all of its representatives out of Israel. And there must be pressure on you because back home in Israel, they're asking you what the hell's happening here. And you don't have very much good news for them, do you?
Well, I don't want to comment on the actions of the South African government.
That's very diplomatic of you.
I know, but I still don't want to. I'm not going to comment on what they are doing. I again want to reiterate the fact that we are interested in having good relations with South Africa. We believe in a dialogue. We believe in an open discussion, even on things that we not always agree on. And I think we have a lot of potential, a tremendous potential of working together on very many issues.
I'm happy to hear that. Have the Department of International Relations and Cooperation been receptive to these thoughts and these ideas that you have?
Well, we are. I'm trying to have a dialogue with different segments of the people in South Africa, and some things we are moving better. There is more openness. Some things are more difficult, but we are trying, and I think again, my task, as I see it, is to try and to promote the relations between our two countries.
So a friend of mine this week introduced me to a fellow named Edward Murrow. And I'm really intrigued by the fact that he says, if you're not confused right now, then you really don't know what's going on. And I'm so confused.
You mean in terms of what's happening there?
Anything. If you're not confused right now, you really don't know what's going on. And there are so many things moving so quickly. I mean, every morning when we wake up and listen to the news, what's happening, where things are. And then because we're all on social media, there's so much what we're calling in our office clickbait diplomacy happening right now, right? Lots of megaphones with lots of stuff that sounds like clickbait. And I'm wondering what, in South Africa specifically, the relationship between Israel and South Africa is far deeper than just diplomacy. We've got family here and there. We have got, whether it is in agriculture, in our economy, quite
technology,
deep
yeah, of course,
relationship. What does it mean when the diplomatic relations fail in the way that they are failing right now? What does that mean for us as South Africans?
Well, I wouldn't define the diplomatic relations as failing. I think there are difficulties. I will not hide that. There are difficulties. But as you said, life goes on. And we have very strong economic relations. We have about, I think, $400 or $450 million of trade going both ways.
Mhm.
We have academic connections. We have tourism. People are going back and forth. We have a Jewish community here, which is very, very active in the development of this country. So, life goes on. The ties go on. The relations go on,
Mhm.
and
that is in spite of whatever diplomatic challenges may arise.
well, diplomatic challenges exist. That is true, but this is our job as diplomats to try to overcome them.
All right, so Ambassador, let's just talk about what's going on at the moment, because there are so many people with so many opinions. What is the official line on how things have proceeded since those terror attacks on the 7th of October? I think at that point, the world was in outrage, and I think everybody was absolutely horrified by what they saw. It very quickly, within hours of that happening, turned into a whataboutism argument, both sides, cycle of conflict, blah, blah, blah. Where are we at the moment? Because Israel has responded quite fast, but they've given a bit of time in between. And it wasn't as if, immediately, there was this retaliation from the other side, despite the fact that people were probably justified, and many people, including most Americans, have that opinion. South Africans, maybe it's a different kettle of fish. But what is Israel's response now, with the benefit of hindsight over a month? And where are we at in terms of how this conflict is escalating?
Yes. Well, I think it's very important for the people to understand the facts. I think, and this is the key thing here, because there is a lot of attempts to manipulate the information and distort the reality. So the facts are very important. So obviously, on the 7th of October, Israel was attacked in a massive way. We didn't expect it. It was not only that it was an attack on a very large magnitude and scope, but also the degree of cruelty that our people in the southern part of Israel have experienced was really unprecedented. It was, in a way, it was a kind of a medieval savagery of slaughtering families, children, old people, taking hostages, and so on. So this was a truly experience that shocked the people of Israel, and I believe not only the people of Israel, but of course we felt it. It were our people that were slaughtered, and this is something that I think for all of us as a society was a huge blow. And I think we are still, many people in Israel are still traumatized, because we lost about 1,400 people, and as of now, we are as we speak, there is still a very long process of identification of victims, because not all the victims have been identified already. So these victims, they had to be buried, because you can't keep dead people. So they were buried, but then they had to be exhumed and for identification and so on. So we are still in this process. Funerals are still going on in Israel. We could see whole families being buried one next to each other. And of course, there is a great deal of worry regarding the hostages.
Yeah,
we had to.
How many hostages
Speaking
are there
of
at this
hostages.
point? Yeah,
So-
what's the status of those hostages?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because we are not sure who is alive and who is not. And every time we unfortunately find remains of some people that were thought to be hostages. Just a few days ago, there was during the 7th of October, there was a very tragic case of a young girl that was basically kidnapped at the party that took place in the south of Israel. There were 260 people that were killed on this during this party, mainly young people that came for a festival of love and music, as it was called. And it turned to be a bloodbath. And one of these girls, she was kidnapped. She was brutally attacked by the Hamas terrorists, raped, and then paraded naked on the streets of Gaza. And this was documented by the Hamas terrorists themselves. And a few days ago, we got information that she was dead. And the information was because in a very, I don't know, brutal, in a very shocking way, her head was found.
Oh my God!
So that's the level of atrocities that we've gone through, and that was the shock.
Ambassador, over the weekend, the BBC was reporting from an interview that they had with, and I've been trying to say this name, and I hope I say it correctly, Abu Mazrak, right? And with all the calls for a ceasefire, what he then said, and what the BBC was reporting, is that they are unable to say where all the hostages are, or what he calls the guests of Palestine. They are unable to say where all the hostages are because different factions are holding different people. Now, to me, when I hear that, it also says that there is no center that is holding information. So how then does Israel proceed in a situation like that, where the one person says, we don't know where everyone is, we don't know who is holding who, we don't know what the situation on the ground is? How do you proceed with, who do you negotiate with if there is to be a negotiation? How do you agree to a ceasefire if there's no central power in control?
Well, I would say that the situation is really complicated. Also because we don't know exactly who was taken hostage, who is still alive, who is not. Unfortunately, nobody except the Hamas has access to the hostages. So they don't. We don't know their condition. We don't know what provisions they have, what conditions they are held in. And we know that among the hostages there are some very elderly people, that some of them require medication, some of them are Holocaust survivors, and we also know that there are also about 35 children.
Yeah,
some of them
babies.
are very, very young. Yeah, the youngest is 9 months old. So, we really don't know what is their situation. We don't know anything about them.
So,
but just to conclude, we see they were kidnapped by the Hamas. This attack was perpetrated by the Hamas, and the Hamas has the responsibility for releasing of all the hostages. And we see them as responsible for that.
So, Ambassador, let's talk about the response Israel has been persuaded to take in the last while, because this is now what's garnering enormous international attention, and people are talking about how, it's turned Gaza into powder and rubble, and that Israel is coming to this with full force. I don't know how exactly anyone expected Israel to respond. Was there a better way, with the benefit of a month's hindsight? How is Israel doing? What is their aim? What is the ultimate goal in Gaza? Is it to extirpate Hamas? And is that going to cost the lives of many civilians, as any state of war will? That's how war works. Have we given up on the hostages? I mean, because if we're going to attack here, that's going to be part of the question, right?
Well, unfortunately, we are dealing here with a terrorist organization. And the terrorist organization, this specific terrorist organization, Hamas, has explicitly stated, and it's also written in their charter, and they have repeated it times and times again, that their aim is to destroy Israel. It's not a question of territory. It's not a question of some kind of a dispute. It's for us, it's an existential issue.
Yeah.
So our only way to deal with Hamas is to prevent them from having any attacks in the future of a similar on a similar scale. And we need to remember that again, as we speak, the Hamas still fires rockets on
Every day.
Israel every day. And until now, since the 7th of October, they fired close to 10,000 rockets. And they fire them indiscriminately. They fire them on cities, on towns, on villages in Israel.
And if Israel didn't have this dome, they would be killing as many people as Israel's accused of killing in Gaza.
I assume so,
Probably
but it's
many
not a matter. It's not a matter of killing.
No, it's not to this proportionality discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
And what we all the time are saying, and that's what we really. This is our policy. We don't have. It's not a war of Israel with the Palestinians. We don't have any kind of conflict with the Palestinian people in Gaza. We do have a conflict and a war with the Hamas. And our aim of this operation is to dismantle the terrorist capabilities of the Hamas in Gaza. Because if we are not going to do it, it's going to be repeated again and again and again. And we greatly regret, deeply, deeply regret any loss of lives and property for the people of Gaza. It's not our aim.
The cost, though, is on both sides. And it's not just a cost of lives, but there is also a psychological cost, I would say, in terms of the terror that is wrought on both sides, but also as the world watches what is viewed as a systematic slaughtering. Is there no opportunity for any kind of diplomacy? Is there anybody having the open channels, understanding that Hamas, unlike PLO, are a terror organization that does not really have a mandate from the people? But is there anybody that is able to open the channels on both sides, particularly in terms of saving the lives of women and children?
Well, I think that, the people of Gaza are really suffering. I mean, there is no doubt about it.
Well, they've been suffering before October the 7th.
They've been suffering before,
Hamas
but
anyway.
particularly now. You're
it's
right.
a horrible, horrible place to live.
It is.
And most of that is not to do with Israel.
And, right. And they have been living since 2007 under a really very brutal and repressive dictatorship.
Yes.
So this is also, you're right, because this also has to be stated.
Yes.
But I think now it's very easy to stop the suffering of the people of Gaza. And it's in the hands of the Hamas. If the Hamas releases the hostages, if the Hamas stops firing the missiles on Israel, if the Hamas will punish the perpetrators of the terrorist attack and stops terrorizing Israel and choose the political path of negotiation and talking to Israel, then the people of Gaza will stop suffering.
Yeah.
And the people of Israel will stop suffering.
And what about the tension between the PLO and Hamas? Does that also come into play in terms of who has the opportunity really to bring an end or to bring people to the negotiation table?
Well, this is something that is related to more to the Palestinian side, but I think that any support for the Hamas basically weakens the more moderate part of the Palestinian society, because the Hamas is really the extreme of the extreme. And the Hamas, you cannot have peace or negotiations with the Hamas like you couldn't have peace negotiations with ISIS or with Al-Qaeda. It's exactly the same ideology. And what we saw, it even exceeded in cruelty the barbarous attacks of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So, I don't think anyone could think of talking to ISIS or talking to Al Qaeda, and I also don't think it's possible to talk to the Hamas unless, again, they give up on their terrorist activities and turn into some sort of a political party
Player.
or player. Yeah, exactly. So otherwise, you cannot coexist with terrorists.
So all these calls for a ceasefire, I mean, that's pie in the sky, because unless Hamas will surrender and stop doing what they're doing, there is absolutely no incentive for Israel to stop with their attacks on Gaza. They have to wipe out Hamas if Hamas will not stand and deliver and play according to the rules of war. I mean, there's no way Israel can tolerate a terrorist organization whose primary purpose and stated manifesto is to wipe out Israel. You can't, there's no sitting down with someone like that and having a conversation, is there, Ambassador? And what do Israelis feel about this? Is Israel very united in this situation? Is there a question of communities all over the world who are standing with Israel? Because we've heard from our government and others that they're very much standing with what they say is Palestine. In this case, they're not going so far as to say they're standing with Hamas, although there are protests all over the world where people are saying, obviously, they're standing with Hamas, which is disturbing. What's Israel saying? What are the people in Israel saying? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, the people in Israel are united. As I said, we are still in a stage of trying to come to terms with what has happened on the 7th of October. But obviously, everybody, and I mean really everybody, understands that there is no other way. And it's the duty of our government to act in self-defense in order to prevent such attacks on Israeli people in the future. And I don't think any government in the world would agree to go through something like this.
And then to their own annihilation.
Exactly. Because that's just
is that not the
impossible.
primary purpose of a government, is to protect their citizens?
Absolutely. That's the contract between the government and its people.
Social contract. We speak a lot about social contracts in this country. But I'm also wondering then, it has always been Israel's stated position that if you come at us, we're coming back tenfold, right? And this is what we're watching play out with Hamas. What about other organizations, kind of Hezbollah, the West Bank? And this morning, I think there was something in the news about some kind of insurgency happening in that area too. Have you seen any emboldening? Because that's what happens when one person tries their luck, other people are emboldened to try their luck too. What's happening in that front?
Well, the Hezbollah, like the Hamas, are both aimed. Their aim is destruction of Israel. Hezbollah is based in Lebanon. Both of them are supported by Iran. By the way, Iran was the only country in the world that congratulated Hamas on the attack. And also we have another group of Houthis in Yemen that were also firing. Trying to fire rockets at Israel and attacking Israel from the south. So we are. It's not an easy situation, but also I can say that the people in Israel are really united, as I mentioned before, and we are ready. We are ready for any development. I think we were caught by surprise by the Hamas attack. This also has to be said.
Why?
Well,
a lot of people in the comments are asking, how is it that a country that prides itself on a really, really extraordinary intelligence service, were people just starting to lull themselves into a false sense of security? Because for a while, there was the ceasefire everyone's now calling for. For the longest time, there was this idea that Israel was, getting along okay with its neighbors.
We were talking on this very show, actually, we were talking about, because on the 15th of September, the signing of normalization with Saudi Arabia. I mean, we've been talking about Abraham Accords. We've been talking about a loosening of aggression around the region.
Yeah.
And then seemingly out of nowhere.
Well, probably
And
as a result of those
because we
people
just
being
had the
pushed.
intelligence conversation.
Yeah.
Was there intelligence and was it ignored?
Well, these questions are being asked in Israel as well.
Yeah.
But what according to in our sort of in our way, when you have a war, you fight the war. You start investigating and asking these questions
In
after
peace.
the war.
After
The war, and there is going to be a very thorough investigation in what has happened. Very thorough, and there will be conclusions. And I'm sure, the leaders of Israel will take the responsibility for what has happened. This definitely is going to take place.
What about the propaganda war? I mean, that's another thing entirely. We're watching people all over the world who are now taking sides. We've seen these big protests in most of the Western world's capitals. We've seen it in places as disparate as Sydney and London, New York and Vancouver, where people have taken to the streets, mostly in those places, very vocal supporters of, they say, Palestine. Some will go further and say Hamas.
And lots of calls for a ceasefire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Massive, just an unconditional ceasefire because human lives. Clearly, these people have no idea how war works. But what do you think of the state of the propaganda war, and especially in this country, whether there is any support at all for Israel? Because it seems very muted in response to the Palestinians' support all over the world. Is this just a coordinated propaganda war on their part, or is it a proper blooming of genuine groundswell support?
Well, I think an interesting illustration of what has happened and what you were asking about, I think we could see in the what has happened with the Al Ali hospital.
Yeah, which was a complete fake news story.
It was a complete fake news story. And it was interesting to see that right after the missile has fell, the Hamas missile fell on the hospital. So there were two responses. The Israeli response was, we need to check what exactly has happened. We will investigate and come back.
Mm-hmm.
The Hamas response was, it was an Israeli missile and 500 people have died.
Mm-hmm.
So straight away, minutes after the missile fell, they knew exactly whom to blame and how many victims there were.
And it was, of course, complete nonsense.
It was complete nonsense.
And it was the story turned within a space of hours. And amazingly, major international news publications, including the New York Times and other papers of record and sources of, unabashed mainstream news, were proven to be incorrect. Very few of them even issued apologies after finding out the actual facts of the story. It's maddening. This is a propaganda war that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. That's why I brought it up, because, you have two sources of information here. Israel, which is a democratic state, and Hamas, which is a terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, like in many others, everybody picks up what the Hamas says.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel information is being doubted. And that's a very, very sad situation. And now we still can see it. There are reports about, for example, I was asked many times why Israel does not supply any more water to Gaza.
Yes.
Now, and the water supply has been resumed. And the water supply has been resumed a few days after the 7th of October. So there is it's simply not true. And there are again, Israel, there were a lot of complaints, still are, about fuel supply. Why Israel does not permit fuel supply to Gaza? But people don't ask themselves, because the Hamas every day fires dozens of rockets on Israel.
But
and to fire rockets,
you need fuel.
You need a launch site, absolutely, and you need thousands of liters of fuel.
Mhm.
Wonder
So
where that's
they
coming
have the
from.
fuel
So-
for the launching site, but
So-
not
so
for the
these
hospital.
people who
But-
are
and
asking you,
this-
they actually want Israel to supply the fuel to
That's going
destroy
to-
Israel. I mean, it's just the most bizarre circular argument I've ever heard in my life.
But
Yeah,
this is
so-
also what I'm talking about when just about the clickbaitiness of this particular situation is where people are fueled by the clickbait and the anger. That's kind of what draws everybody's joy and attention, as it were, particularly on social media, because in those areas it's unregulated. People can say and do as they please.
Yeah, and fake news is the order of the day.
But I'm wondering then what will become of the Abraham Accords, because this was kind of a piece of diplomacy that for a long time was seen as something that could bring stability in that region. Is it over?
No, I don't think it's over, and I think the strategic interests of all the members, all the parties to the Abraham Accord are still there, and there is still an interest to pursue, and we still have diplomatic relations with all the members of the Abraham Accord. So I don't think that the Abraham Accord have completed it has
Mission.
completed its mission. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think we are still there, and there are difficulties. That's true, but I don't think we are over it. Not at all.
Speaking of missions, though, you started by saying that when you took this mission, you knew that it was difficult and it was going to be a hard slog. And it was about trying to build better relationships between our two nations. What, in the space of where we are right now, what is your current hope for where South Africa and Israel's diplomatic relations could go?
Well, I think what is very important is to have an open dialogue. I think this is the key. And I think this is in the interest of Israel. And that's what we are aiming at. And I think if we will be able to have this open dialogue and have talks with each other, I think perhaps many of misunderstandings that exists now will be clarified. And I think this is what I'm aiming at.
Funny, that reminds me of a Zulu saying that the saying is "Izinto zoniwa umlomo." You ruin things by speaking, but you also fix them. Ziphinde zilungiswe ngomlomo. So you also fix them by speaking. So I too hope that the dialogue remains open.
Yeah. Look, this is not going to go away anytime soon. And for Israel, it is a very, very tough question. For the people of Gaza, it's a very tough question. And let's be clear, you don't have to be the sort of person who takes delight in someone else's suffering in order to have a side in this. In fact, the best position to occupy is that any human suffering is regrettable. But this is a state of war, and it is not a state of war that Israel asked for. This was not started by them suddenly because they decided they wanted to go in and attack Gaza. Everything was perfectly peaceful the day before the 7th of October. I don't know how it's going to be resolved, neither do you, Ambassador. I hope in terms of South African and Israeli relations that we can establish some sort of détente and accord going forward, because obviously it is beneficial to the world that countries do talk to each other, as Pumi says. All I can say at this point is I've made it very clear what my position is here. I'm pro-civilization. I'm pro people being able to live in peaceful societies and not have indiscriminate attacks upon civilians who are trying to live their lives in any part of the world. What is going on in this particular situation is obviously very complicated, and we'll continue to see propaganda coming from the pro-Palestinian lobby. We can already see it. It seems very coordinated. We also see Israel trying to get its own propaganda out there. But it's going to be a difficult thing to negotiate. And I think the more information we have, sometimes the more complex it even looks.
I told you.
Yeah.
We're going to stay confused, at least a little bit more intelligent in our confusion after this conversation.
But my
still
thoughts are with the people of Israel and the people of Gaza, because frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it is a this is a point of ignition for wars that can spread much further than that area. And I think none of us are in favor of that happening.
Absolutely. I think any loss of human lives, it doesn't matter who it is a terrible thing. Absolutely terrible. And I think we really don't want to cause any loss in lives or any
Is
other.
It true, just incidentally, is it true that Israel's opened up a humanitarian corridor for people who want to flee from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza, where it is safer, where they're not trying to get rid of the Hamas leadership that is so entrenched in Gaza City, that they've opened up these corridors? Because again, we're not seeing a lot of this in the press.
No, of course. Actually, every time before an attack takes place in a certain area, the citizens are informed. The problem is that the Hamas is hiding behind the people of Gaza. They're hiding in hospitals, they're hiding in mosques, they're hiding in schools. We could see their infrastructure. The main bunker of the Hamas is actually under the Shifa hospital, which is the biggest hospital in Gaza, which was built, by the way, by Israelis. And they are just hiding underneath because they know we are not going to attack hospitals.
It's astounding for me. I keep trying to figure out if the information that they have been planning these attacks for 2 years, that they have built all these tunnels, that they have stockpiled all this weaponry, the same skill set required to build the tunnels is the same skill set required to build bunkers
and bomb shelters.
And why not plan for that? Why not plan? Because again, everybody knows Israel's stance is if you come at us, we're coming back. So Hamas knew that Israel would retaliate. And yet there was no planning in place for what would happen to the civilians.
Hamas are not hiding the ball. They're not telling us that they're doing one thing and doing another. They've been very clear about, and if nothing else, they've been completely honest, Ambassador, about what they've wanted to do.
Absolutely. And also there was an interesting...
this is not a surprise. In other words, all those people all over the world are like, oh, can't believe Hamas did this. They've been telling us what they want to do for years.
Right. And there was an interesting interview with Musa Abu Marzouk, who was one of the leaders of the Hamas. And he said, the tunnels are for the Hamas. The people above the tunnels are 75% of them are refugees. I mean, this is his words, not mine.
Yeah, he said that it's the UN's responsibility.
It's UN's responsibility. It's not the Hamas responsibility, according to him. And, at the end of the day, the Hamas could let the people of Gaza go into the tunnels. How many lives they would save by letting them get into the tunnels. But the problem is that the Hamas, and I think that's the tragedy of it, they are sacrificing death. They are educating children of Gaza on hatred. And there are very many examples that show them. And this is a very sad reality that the people of Gaza are going through. And I think it should be a really top priority for the international community to actively intervene and get the Hamas out of Gaza, because it's going to be it's an Israeli problem, but it's not only an Israeli problem; it's an international problem.
All right. Well, good luck. I do not envy your task at the moment. I think things are probably at an all-time low in terms of relations between this country of ours and Israel, even if you don't have to say it, Ambassador.
The man's not ruffled. Look at this.
No, he's as calm he's cool as a cucumber, which is remarkable. But thank you for coming to see us this morning. It's there's plenty in the main. For those people in the comment section are saying this sounds a little bit one-sided. Well, there are 100 media organizations in South Africa that you can go and follow if you want to hear the other side of the story. There are only there's just us.
No one is carrying this side of the story.
No.
So we're glad you woke up and drove all this way this morning.
Filling a gap in here.
Very early morning.
Very good. All right. And there's lots that we could still unpack based on what we spoke to Jasmine about earlier, but we're going to have to leave it for now. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming to see us. Pums, thank you very much. We will see you next Thursday for the Burning Platform, and we'll see you tomorrow morning for cliffcentral.com's morning show. Thank you. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.